I would like to introduce our speaker for this evening. He formerly worked in the command center for NASA, but he felt a calling to go and kind of serve his country through activism. So he's now the president of Texans for Strong Borders. So without further introduction, I would be happy to introduce my friend, Chris Russo.
Howdy, everybody. Howdy. Can everyone hear in the back? Everyone can hear? Yes. All righty. So, my name's Chris Russo. I'm the president and founder of Texans for Strong Borders. Thank you, Isaac, for the invite to come speak to this group. I've been following this group and a lot of the work they've been doing in the Plano area, and I think this is sorely needed as far as activists getting young people involved in doing real conservative work in this area. Unfortunately, a lot of the state reps, even some of the state senators in this area, they say a lot on the campaign trail, but when it comes to actual governance, they break their promises. And there's no bigger issue where we've had consistent promises broken, especially by Republican elected officials, than on the issue of border security and immigration policy. So, to give you a little bit of background on me, as Isaac said, for about 6.5 years, I worked in NASA at NASA Johnson Space Center in Mission Control. And so I was an operations planner for the International Space Station. I started Texans for Strong Borders because I saw that there were a lot of single issue groups that were working around the state, you know, on pro-life issues or fiscal responsibility, a whole host of issues. But on the issue that is maybe the single most important, along with election security, let's say, for the future of the Republican Party and of the ideals that conservatives care about, there was no one working on the border or immigration policy in general. And so I was talking to a friend of mine who has been involved in Texas politics for a long time in the spring of 2022, and we started Texans for Strong Borders. We debuted at the Republican Party of Texas State Convention in Houston in 2022, and we've been working ever since, talking to grassroots groups, engaged in talks with our elected officials about the types of policy that we need, both at the state level and at the federal level, to secure our borders and also reform the legal immigration system in the United States to put America and her citizens first. And that's the name of the game, is that any immigration system that we have should be for the benefit of the citizens of the United States, not for the special interests, not for the firms, and not even for the immigrants themselves, even though many of them may be fine people. And so we bring ourselves to the Biden administration and, of course, the waning months of the Biden administration, no matter who wins in November. And what have we seen over the last 3.5 years or so? Where are we at as far as border security? I think everyone knows it's been an abject disaster, but what does that mean in real terms? So, as of today, the latest numbers from the Department of Homeland Security say that there are a little over 9.5 million nationwide border encounters. So that's when someone who is an inadmissible alien is actually apprehended and processed. And over 2 million gotaways that are known gotaways. That means they were observed either on camera or by a Border Patrol agent, but they were not able to be apprehended. So that brings the total of illegal border crossings that we know of to 11.5 million. 11.5 million in 3.5 years. That's bigger than the population of all but I think 10 states. And that doesn't even count the people who come through our border without ever being detected. And so the number that I tell people, although the note, by nature, you can't know exactly how many people make it through undetected. But what I think is a conservative estimate, and this is something that the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and others throw out there. I think Ted Cruz has thrown this figure out as well. I think that the real number is between 12 and 15 million people in just 3.5 years. Now, the immediate effects of that are, of course, what we see every day. It seems like every single day we see another American citizen victimized by people who have been allowed to cross our border. And in many cases, people with known gang affiliations, people with a known criminal history, and sometimes people that have been deported from the United States multiple times for violent offenses. Just the other day, we had a police officer killed. And it's come out that the suspect in that murder was a member of a Venezuelan street and prison gang called Tren de Aragua. And they are basically MS-13 on steroids. And they've primarily operated in Venezuela, but because of the Venezuelan government pushing a lot of their people through the Darien Gap and northward across the U.S.-Mexico border, we now have, according to a new DHS report, over 1,000 confirmed members of that prison gang residing in the United States, many of whom DHS knew about it. And these are just the ones that DHS knows that they're affiliated with it. Laken Riley's killer in Georgia, also affiliated with Tren de Aragua. And that guy's brother as well, the one who was originally residing in Athens, Georgia, before hosting his brother, who actually was arrested for a couple of other crimes in the state of New York. So this has become a big problem where we're having literal prison gangs from Venezuela making their way up here, residing in a neighborhood near you. Not in necessarily these sanctuary cities, but everywhere. They start out in the sanctuary cities and they move all over the place. And that's why what I and other border experts have said is that this is no longer just a border issue. Every state is now a border state. And of course, for the last 3.5 years, Joe Biden has not only not done the work necessary to secure the border, he has put into place policies that have actively made the situation worse, because a lack of enforcement is interpreted by those who want to come here illegally as an invitation to cross the border illegally. They know that if they come here, they most likely are not going to be sent home. They're probably going to be given a notice to appear that they may or may not go to. They can claim asylum. They have WhatsApp groups with a script of how to get through the initial asylum interview, so that they can be released, often on their own recognizance, virtually anywhere they want to go in the United States. And the Department of Homeland Security has given hundreds of millions of dollars to NGOs that basically the whole purpose of their organization has been redefined to quote-unquote migrant relocation. That means these people, if they have relatives or friends who are already in the United States, or if they've already made a prior agreement as part of their payment to get into the United States with the narco-terrorist cartels, that this is where they need to go for their forced labor agreement, then that's where they go. And that brings me to my next point. This is not the same type of migration that we've seen throughout the last 40 years into the United States. You know, in the 1970s and 80s, and even into the late 90s, what you saw primarily was day workers or seasonal workers that were primarily Mexican men that would cross the border from Mexico into the United States illegally. They'd probably live or work for a few months, and then they would go back over the border. That was the vast majority of them. Now, you had more and more of them over the years trying to establish residency. I think when the Reagan amnesty was signed in 1986, they estimated that there were about, I want to say, 5 million illegal aliens that were residing in the United States in 1986. And of course, the objective of that border security later for amnesty now grand bargain, as you'll hear it called, was that they wanted to say that Yeah, well, we might have a lot of people in the United States illegally now, but we want to reduce the number of people who are coming in illegally in the future. Of course, that backfired massively, where now most experts agree that between 11 and about 22 million people are residing in the United States legally. So, where we're at right now is a situation where every single inch of the U.S.-Mexico border is controlled by the narco-terrorist cartels. What does that mean? On the Mexican side of the border, every single person who goes across has to pay their way. And this isn't what it used to be, where you'd pay $200 to a coyote to sneak you across in a canoe or something like that. We're talking about thousands of US dollars, about $2,000 to $2,500 for a Mexican national. If you're from somewhere else in Central America, it might go up a little bit more than that. If you're from outside of the Western Hemisphere, especially if you're from one of these adversarial nations to the United States, if you're from China, Russia, Iran, somewhere like that, you're looking at upwards of $9,000 or more to come to the United States. How are these people getting the money? First of all, many of them are not the poorest of the poor in their own countries, but comparatively, they see the bargain of coming to the United States as something where they will have a better life and a better earning potential. The second case is that many of them already have people who are living and working in the United States that are friends or relatives, and they get those people to pay off the cartels to bring them into the United States. And then finally, the third way is through forced labor and even what become later human trafficking. So a lot of what will happen is, you come into an agreement with the cartel to be smuggled across, and they tell you it's going to be this much. And if you tell them, I don't have that much, they say, well, you'll just come and work for us until you've worked off your debt. Or they will say, okay, well, I have that much, here it is. They get to the United States, they get to where they're supposed to be, and the cartel comes to them and says, you know how we said 2,500? Well, we've decided it's actually 5,000. And so you'll be working for us until you've paid off your penalty. And if not, we know where your family is, we know where all of your friends are, and we'll come after them. We won't just come after you, we'll come after them. And so you can see how this situation has become one of the biggest funders of organized crime south of the border, and even with the cells that are operating inside of the United States. So human smuggling alone has become a $20 billion economy at the U.S.-Mexico border. $20 billion. In fact, when the human smuggling is at its peak, it's actually more lucrative for them than drug smuggling, although the two are often intertwined. So one of the ways that people that don't have enough money to pay their way to get across can pay their way is to enter into a drug smuggling agreement. So they'll become a mule for the cartel as they're crossing the border. And one of the impacts that we've seen to American citizens has been in the fentanyl crisis. So we've seen countless people that have tried to self-medicate or take one pill, let's say, and it ends up being laced with fentanyl and they die. I've heard this story at multiple events, and I've only been doing events like this for just over 2 years. And I've heard at multiple events people having friends or direct relatives that have ended up dead because of the fentanyl crisis. So we've had that issue. So those are all of the immediate impacts that we have from 12 to 15 million people coming into the United States. But this crisis isn't over when the people get to the border. They're only the problem of Border Patrol, let's say, for the first 48 hours. Now you have 12 to 15 million people, many of whom are in debt to the cartel, have minimal skills, have a desperate situation where they can be leaned on by the most evil organizations in the world. And we have them here where we are now obligated to subsidize their housing. If they have children here, their children are given birthright citizenship, where they are given free education and access to health care and all of the above. And in addition, we have the electoral consequences. One of the strategies of the left has been to weaponize this mass migration with the objective of transforming the political culture in this country and essentially replacing the electorate as it stands with the people who have come to the United States and resided in the United States for decades, sometimes since the founding, and diluting those people's votes with an influx of new people who, even if there's no amnesty, if things remain as they are and they have children, their children will be able to vote in the United States. And the reality is this, is Republicans are doing better with Hispanics nationwide, but those statistics have a lot to do with nation of origin and residence time. So people that have been in the United States for multiple generations, third, fourth, fifth generation Hispanics, are much more likely to be voters for the Republican Party and conservative policies in general than people who are first or second generation. The other thing is that we're seeing a shift in this where recent arrivals, because so many of them are the products of illegal immigration, you're seeing more and more people that are not willing to close off the spigot of people coming across the border. And eventually you're going to get to a situation where there is not going to be a path to victory for a conservative candidate to assume the presidency or to have any sort of majority at the federal level. Now, I think it's going to be a longer time before we see those effects in Texas because the electorate's a little bit unique here. But at the same time, we have a lot of problems in the state of Texas as it is. And so what I want to go over with you is sort of where we're at in the state of Texas and what we can do as a state to combat what's going on and stop the flow of illegal immigration and reform the legal immigration system at the federal level. So everyone knows, unless we are able to get the presidency and a majority in both the Congress and the Senate, we can't make any permanent changes to law that would, in the long term, solve the problems of illegal immigration and reform the more problematic parts of federal immigration law that have made it tough for even presidents like President Trump to clamp down on what's going on at the border. So that's the first step. But in the meantime, we as the state of Texas cannot tolerate what's been going on to continue. And immigration is generally thought of as a federal issue, border security and immigration. But the fact is that the state does have constitutional tools that it can work with in crises such as the current one. So how many of you, with a show of hands, have heard of Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution? Anybody? 1, 2, 3 people? So Article 1 of the Constitution is the powers of the legislature. And Section 10 is actually a list of things that are prohibitions for the state governments. Like, a state government can't do this without the consent of Congress, all the way down. But in Clause 3 of Article 1, Section 10, you've got a provision that are basically emergency war powers for the states. So it says that states cannot, for example, keep troops or ships of war in times of peace, or lay duties on tonnage, or enter into interstate compacts with other states or with foreign governments, unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. And so not only my organization, but many people at the state level and at the federal level, for example, the Center for Renewing America, which is Russ Vought and Ken Cuccinelli's think tank, they have put out a couple of white papers on the historicity of Article 1, Section 10 and how it was interpreted by the founders to demonstrate that basically it was intended for just such a situation as this, where we have an active human smuggling situation and drug smuggling situation that is completely uncontrolled. And the federal government does not even have the willingness to control it at this point. And so the states would be able to, in that case, directly impede people crossing the border and apprehend people that are caught crossing the border illegally and send them back to their nations of origin. Most likely they would just push them or transport them directly back into Mexico. And so there was actually a House bill that was filed in the Texas legislature, House Bill 20, last session, that ended up getting killed by Speaker Dade Phelan, that would have established a Texas Border Protection Unit to do exactly that. And so that was killed by Speaker Dade Phelan. If you want to know more about that, I've written a lot of articles on it. Unfortunately, we didn't knock him out in the primary, but there's a very small chance that he'll be returning as Speaker. Now, the same people that were the power behind the scenes, behind Dade Phelan, they are trying to remain in power in this next session. I don't think they're going to be successful. We were very successful as the grassroots in kicking out, I think it ended up being 15 incumbents in the Texas House. And so there's a lot of new blood in there, and a lot of the people who were sort of along for the ride, who just didn't want to cross leadership because that had certain professional consequences, are now no longer in a position where they feel forced to do so. They feel pressure from their own constituents. Many of them ended up holding on to their seats but had close calls themselves. And so I think we're going to see new leadership in the Texas House, and that's going to allow us to actually do something along the lines of that Article 1, Section 10 approach. Now, at the end of the day, it is going to come down to getting a bill passed and then having that bill giving the governor enough political pressure and cover as well to begin directly repelling people that are coming across and carrying people back into Mexico. And even with the protest of the Mexican government, because even with Senate Bill 4, which was something that was passed in the fourth special session, that would have basically allowed for a court order for essentially a self-deportation under supervision of law enforcement for people that are apprehended crossing the border illegally. The Mexican government said they won't even take their own nationals back across the border. So they won't allow their own Mexican citizens who are escorted by Texas law enforcement on a removal order to come back across the border to their home country of Mexico. That's how much of an adversary. And I don't know if you guys follow Mexican politics, but AMLO, who's like a left-wing populist who was the president of Mexico, is going to be replaced by an even more left-wing activist named Claudia Sheinbaum. And she is extremely left-wing, extremely progressive, and she's basically said that it is a human right for people to be able to use Mexico as a pathway for limitless migration into the United States. And so we know we're not going to receive any sort of cooperation from the Mexican government. But, you know, Governor Abbott does have tools in his toolbox that he has not used to ensure that the Mexican government doesn't have leverage. For example, whenever the state of Texas has engaged in extreme vetting of all of the trucks that are coming across the border from Mexico, bringing primarily agricultural goods into the state of Texas, that slows the work so much that immediately, if not the Mexican federal government, then the Mexican state governments bordering Texas will come to the table and enter into some sort of agreement. Now, depending on how sustained that pressure is, they might go back on that agreement immediately after the goods start flowing again. But it's just one possible tool that with enough political will, you can use to actually have the state step into the gap left by the federal government. Now, that won't solve the problem entirely, of course. Texas has 1,250 miles of border. We would need a huge personnel buildup with that sort of border protection unit under state government to be able to actually stop or at least impede the flow of millions of people across the border. But we've shown that even just a show of force directs people elsewhere. But it wouldn't solve the problem for the nation because, of course, Texas is the only state with a Republican governor that's on the border between the U.S. and Mexico. And so we have 1,250 miles of border, but the other about 1,200 miles of border are in New Mexico, Arizona, and California. And we've seen, even with the measures that the state has taken, that the Biden administration has funneled people increasingly through ports of entry, through the CBP One app, and then also through the CHNV program, which is a program where these people actually apply from their nation of origin, and DHS flies them into an airport in the interior of the United States from which they're processed into the country. And in, I think, FY23 alone, from just, I think, 7 of the 13 countries that are participants that we have data for, that was over 330,000 people that came into the country. And of course, this is a program that's created with no basis in law. Like DACA or a host of other immigration schemes that the federal government has come up with, it does not conform to federal immigration law or Title VIII. And so for that reason, because securing the line of the border is not enough, you also have to couple that border security with interior enforcement. So what is the primary thing driving people in the United States? The left will tell you that these people are poor asylum seekers, that are, political asylees, that are facing oppression in their nations of origin. The reality is that although there are some people like that, the vast majority of people that are coming here are not eligible for asylum under the laws of the United States. More than 90% of people that apply for asylum are denied it. And a lot of the people that are coming here claiming asylum are lying about it because they're coached to do so, and they know that once they get inside the country, their asylum hearing is going to be sometime in the early 2030s. Does anyone think they're going to show up for that? Of course not. Of course not. And so what we have to do is we have to take the economic calculus of people that are trying to come here for employment and to live off of the largesse of not only the state and the state government outlays and benefits that they can receive, or the federal benefits that their children can receive, but we have to attack it at the local and county level as well. Because a massive amount of the outlays, for example, of county healthcare systems is going to illegal aliens and the children of illegal aliens. And that is taking seniors, military veterans, and everyday citizens who are a part of the United States and making them basically wait in line or have their healthcare rationed for people who have no right to be here at all. And so we have to do a couple of things. First, mandatory E-Verify at the state level. So how many of you are familiar with what E-Verify is? Okay, so more than Article 1, Section 10. Basically, E-Verify is a free system that's been available since 1996. It's administered by the Department of Homeland Security. And basically what they do is when you hire a new employee, you take their I-9 form, which is an immigration form, that's every employee has to submit one. And they cross-check it with the data in the Social Security Administration database. And so if there is a mismatch, that's then reported to the employer, who it's their responsibility to no longer employ that person. Now, there's a certain period where they have to correct their documentation or whatever, and it's not a foolproof system. So, for example, a lot of the people coming across the border under the Biden administration are receiving work authorizations from DHS. And those people would go through the E-Verify system. So it's not foolproof if you have an administration who's willing to completely break the law. But what we've seen in states that have passed E-Verify bills, even not comprehensive ones, is up to an 80% reduction in illegal labor. So they passed one in, I think, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Florida recently passed one, although it has a pretty big exception. Like any business smaller than, I think, 25 employees doesn't have to follow the E-Verify system. And so you can guess that there are a lot of 24 employee contractors that are starting to pop up in the state of Florida. We had the chance to pass E-Verify in the state of Texas. Senator Lois Kolkhorst had a bill in the state Senate to make E-Verify mandatory for all employers. All employers. Now, there was a ramp-up period for the agricultural sector to try and make sure that they didn't have opposition from the Farm Bureau. Of course, that didn't work. The Farm Bureau opposed the bill anyway, saying, get this, the Farm Bureau, of course, with U.S. agriculture famously being one of the biggest employers of illegal labor historically and to this day, they have said, well, they say in private that they will not budge 1 inch on any sort of employment accountability for hiring of illegal aliens until they are given an unlimited, no questions asked H-2A visa for anyone they want to hire. Currently, H-2A visas, which are agricultural visas, are completely uncapped. They're uncapped, but you have to demonstrate as the employer that you're not going to depress local wages and that you're not going to affect the employment level of American citizens. And there's a little bit of paperwork you have to do to prove that. And those visas are, I think they only last like, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but I think it's like 3 years that those visas last up to. And so what they want is basically no questions asked, no accountability. We can hire whoever we want for agriculture. Their stated reason was that rural internet connections are not good enough to comply with uploading a PDF to a website. Now, we're at the Young Republicans, so I think people might actually know what that means and entails. Some of the meetings I go to, they might find the prospect of uploading a PDF to a website quite intimidating. But anyway, so they opposed it. We were 1 vote short in the Texas Senate of being able to pass E-Verify. And then in the Texas House, of course, we had a companion bill that got no action whatsoever. And so this is another issue where Texas can be a leader if we just get adequate political pressure behind our state representatives and state senators. Now, those are the 2 biggest ones. But all of these, thankfully, the grassroots has responded. And at the RPT state convention, the delegates said, these are going to be a legislative priority. A border protection unit with the power to repel and remove illegal border crossers. Mandatory E-Verify for all employers. Eliminating state, local, and county subsidies for illegal aliens, including in-state tuition. Now, in-state tuition, this is one that's particularly galling because, what's the purpose of our state university system? It's to educate the Texans of the future so that they can live and work and be productive professionals in the state of Texas. Well, currently, Texas allows illegal aliens who have 3 years of residency going to a Texas high school and that affirm that they will apply for citizenship at their next opportunity, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we promise, that they get an in-state rate for tuition. Now, Texas was actually the first state to do this. We passed this bill in 2001, and Governor Rick Perry, who was one of the main fundraisers and cheerleaders for Dade Phelan in his reelection campaign, was the one who signed that into law. He also signed into law a couple of years later a specific, everybody remembers the FAFSA, right? The federal application for financial aid or financial student aid. I don't remember the acronym, it slips my mind. Well, the state of Texas actually created a TAFSA, a parallel application that was meant for people who are not eligible for federal benefits. Now, who are those people who are not eligible for federal benefits? Illegal aliens. And so the state not only subsidizes tuition, but on top of that has specific financial aid programs set up for illegal aliens. You might think this is a small fringe issue. How many people could this possibly be? But according to pro-immigration sources, so these are people who welcome the 12 to 15 million people who have come here, there are about 57,000 students who are currently enrolled in institutions of higher learning in the state of Texas. So that's about as many students as the total undergraduate enrollment at Texas A&M. And how much does that cost Texas taxpayers every single year? According to the Federation for American Immigration Reform, who did a study on this, that number just for in-state tuition subsidies is $459 million annually, $500 million. Imagine what we could do with $500 million every single year. That's $1 billion every biennium that we could be putting into things like, let's say, building up a border protection unit. And so these are the more egregious things that have been made priorities for the next legislative session. So that's starting in January 2025. And so for all of you, what I would ask is, you guys live here in Collin County, probably in the Plano area. So you've got a variety of state reps. I think this county and this city are broken up into like 5 or 6 districts. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I think all but one survived a re-election campaign against a Republican challenger. And so that's disappointing. I think Carissa Richardson was the only one who beat out. But that, oh, that's true. Was that part of that in Collin County?
Yes.
Part of it
Yeah.
is.
I guess on the
part of Collin County.
Okay. Thank you for the correction. We're big supporters of Katrina Pearson. She was one that signed our Strong Borders Pledge. I believe Carissa Richardson was too. And so she signed off on a specific policy pledge to accomplish a lot of what I just got done saying. And so what I would encourage you all is pay attention next spring. You need to be in these people's ears. My assignment to you and to every group I talk to is that by the time the next legislative session gavels in, your state rep and probably your state senator should know who you are. They should know your name, and they should say, oh, that's that guy who keeps hammering me on these issues that I've said that I would do. But the problem is that once they get to Austin, there are only a half dozen people like me at any given committee here. And the other 150, 200, 300, 400 that show up to that committee hearing are from these activist groups that are in Houston, the Rio Grande Valley, and El Paso, saying that any form of border security is racist and xenophobic, and that there should be no borders at all. I've had people at committee hearings say that we should not have borders at all. And so just know that once they get from districts into Austin, once they're in that capital, the people they're hearing from are not their constituents. They're the lobbyists that are the lobbyists for all of these big industry lobbies, like the Chamber of Commerce, the hospitality industry, the Farm Bureau, the Realtors Associations, who are opposing any sort of limitations on land sales to foreign citizens, and all of these types of things. They're hearing from these people, not from the people that they were elected to represent, unless they're hearing from you. And so that's my task for you guys, is you need to be pressing these people on from day one, before November. Tell them, in order to earn my vote, you have to, why don't you sign the Strong Borders Pledge? Why don't you commit to these policy positions? And if you commit to that, I will block walk for you. I will put up signs. I will get all of the people in this room to volunteer for your campaign. But until that time, you're just another Republican who has border security on your website, but once you get to Austin or once you get to Washington, D.C., it's the same business as usual.
Right.
So that's how the grassroots can become powerful. So that's what we can do at the state level. Now let's look beyond November. So most of the stuff I talk about is at the state level, but because we have a presidential election in November, I want to talk about the federal level briefly. Now, Isaac, how much time do I have left?
How long do you want to go?
I don't want to bore these people to death, but
Probably like 15 minutes.
let's just talk briefly about the federal level and what we need to push on with the coming election in November. Now, my organization endorsed Donald Trump for re-election back on, I think, December the 5th. So before any primary vote was taken, before he had the nomination, I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I voted for Donald Trump in 2020. I fully plan to vote for Donald Trump in 2024, but I have some concerns. In 2016, Donald Trump was talking about the problems of not only illegal immigration and demanding that we build a physical wall at the border, but he was also talking about legal migration. He was talking about how foreign special interests and the firms that pay so much in contract lobbying at the state and the federal level have been taking advantage of the legal immigration system, in particular H-1B high-skilled visas, to box out American workers and lower American workers' wages. Let me tell you a little bit about the H-1B visa program. Now, that is supposed to be an Einstein genius visa. When it was sold to our representatives in Congress and in the United States Senate, what was said is, we don't have the skills in the United States to do what all of these burgeoning technology companies in the dawn of computing and in the expansion of the research state need to do. We can't do these jobs. That was sold to the American people in the early 90s. Now, as we sit here in 2024, only 40% of American STEM graduates work in STEM. 40%. So we're pushing all of our most highly skilled individuals that are able to go through our university systems and our rigorous training, and we're pushing them into jobs outside of STEM. Most of the time, the people that are surveyed as to why they left STEM, because they can make a better living outside of STEM. And a lot of that is because we are flooding our country with H-1B visa workers, primarily from China and India. Right here in Dallas, AT&T a few years ago laid off 300 engineers. And as a condition of their severance pay, they were forced to train their replacements, again, primarily from India. My own brother-in-law was faced with this just recently. And he didn't even get, 2 months severance. He was basically told, you got to train your replacement or we're not giving you what's owed to you. This is happening to a lot of people. I come from a STEM background, so a lot of people I know, I find out 10 years later, they're not working in engineering anymore. They're doing something different. Now, granted, I got out of STEM for a very different reason than a lot of these people did. I got out of it completely voluntarily because I saw that unless we addressed the issue of border security and wider immigration policy, that we as conservatives were not going to be able to hold on to our country in the next 10 years. I think we have about a 10-year time horizon to solve this problem. The other things we need to focus on: chain migration, which is basically where families can or people that come in on a green card can sponsor their family members to come in as long as they sign a piece of paper saying that these people will, they'll be financially responsible for them. So that has led to a lot of people coming in who would have no conditions for admissibility otherwise. And the other thing is the diversity visa lottery. which is a system where basically a pool of countries based on a lottery system, not need, but a literal lottery system, is allowed to send a certain amount of people to the United States that they get to choose from, essentially. They get to choose from a pool of people that they're sending. So these systems have inflated the number of people who have come into the United States. But what is the total? So since the Hart-Celler Immigration Act in 1965, we've had about 85 million legal immigrants come into the United States. Legal immigrants. That's on top of the 30 million, up to 30 million illegal aliens who have come in since that time. In fact, nearly 100% of the population growth in the United States since 1965 has been from immigration. Now, look, we've had waves of immigration into the United States in the past. But the one people think of most strongly is the second wave of migration, which was people from primarily Southern and Eastern Europe into the United States, and then I guess the Irish as well, Northwestern Europe. But those people came in, and then there was a restriction on immigration that lasted essentially from the 1930s until 1965, where they were given time to assimilate. We didn't have this culture of multiculturalism where assimilation was a bad word. And then the fact is that the cultural distance from the people that lived in the United States was less than what we've seen since 1965. And so what we've had is basically wave upon wave upon wave of illegal and legal immigration for the last, let's say, 80 years. And we need to reorient ourselves in a way that says we can have people come in legally, but what numbers should they be coming in and for what purpose? We will need people that have truly irreplaceable skills. I would say that once we get things under control, if you have a true need for seasonal workers or something like that, that you could really demonstrate, we could do something like that. But as it stands, what my organization and what the Republican Party of Texas platform call for is what we call a net migration moratorium. Now, that doesn't mean zero people coming in, but the theory behind this is that about 250,000 people expatriate in any given year from the United States. And so we would take the current legal migration levels, which are currently over 2 million people a year, and bring that down to a more manageable 250,000 or so. And so with that, we could limit that migration to be based on skill, on merit, in places where we truly need people, and not just the firms need people that they can pay less than domestic workers. So those are the policies that will get us where we need to be on the immigration front. And those are things that were put forward, not the moratorium exactly, but a much more strenuous point system during Donald Trump's first term. If anyone remembers the RAISE Act, it was a proposed piece of legislation that would have created a very, very high bar for legal immigration into the United States. And that was spearheaded by the Trump administration, but it was the opposition of Republicans, primarily Republicans in the U.S. Senate, that would not touch this. And why? Because the Democrats, they are ideologically committed to open borders. They have a lot of corporate benefactors, too, that benefit from cheap labor, but at least it's consistent with their party's ideology. Outside of the few that give, lip service to border security, they don't mean it. We all know they don't mean it. But the Republicans' historic donors, especially in industry, have been addicted to cheap labor for a long time. And so they don't view mass migration as the same type of threat as the base of the Republican Party does. Because the base of the Republican Party is everyday working men and women. They're not people that own a multi-billion-dollar corporation that benefits from illegal labor or low or low skilled labor, lower wages by inflating the overall labor supply. And so the Senate under Trump made sure that had no chance of passing. And unfortunately, what I'm worried about is that lately the rhetoric coming from the RNC and from various places around has been the same old illegal bad, legal good in all cases. Not examining legal immigration and asking the question, does this policy serve the interests of the United States? And this doesn't come from a place of bigotry or hatred or anything like that. It is a simple case of wanting what is in the best interests of the citizens of the United States of America. And that's the question that we should ask first and foremost with any policy, especially migration, is this policy in the best interests of the citizens of the United States? If the answer is no, then we had better have a very compelling reason to pass that. And we probably shouldn't pass it at all. And so what we need to do is we have to make our voices heard. And we have to make sure that our congressmen and our senators are hearing that back to the same old talking points of the Republican Party of lip service on illegal immigration only is not going to suffice. We want the whole enchilada. We want the RAISE Act. We want a net migration moratorium. We want to look into reforming H-1B visas to end this free-for-all and the abuse that is taking our most skilled employees and lowering their wages or pushing them out of the industry altogether. And we want, in the end, across the board, policies that put the interests of Americans first. Now, what is my message to you guys? How can you guys help? Well, I gave you one assignment, which is make sure that by January, your state rep and your state senator know who you are. The second thing is I would like you to help me spread the message here. We're on social media. We have some push cards. If you grab those and grab a koozie, if you'll sign up for our email list, we send out a newsletter. There was an iPad going around, so if you haven't had a chance, make sure that you sign up for our newsletter. The other thing that our email list does is it will give you legislative action alerts. Pardon me one second. Doing the Marco Rubio there. So legislative action alerts are when either Congress or the Senate at the federal level or the state legislature are in session. And we've got an important vote, whether in committee or on the floor. We'll send our entire email list. Here's the measure that's being considered. Here's our position on it. Here's what it does. Here's why it's important that it should pass or it should not pass. And here's the people you need to call and tell that. And what I've seen personally is we've got an email list of over 40,000 people. And so the more people that I talk to, the more grassroots organizations that sign up for that email list and follow it, the more pressure we can put on people. So let me give you a recent example. So we were about to have that Schumer-Lankford immigration compromise that would have essentially codified a lot of the policies of the Biden border crisis, right? And Ted Cruz came out and rightfully opposed it from before the legislation even came out into the public, because of course they know what's going into it because of the talks in the chamber. Senator Cornyn, on the other hand, had not. We put out an action alert telling people to call Senator Cornyn's office in Washington, D.C. Within 30 minutes of me putting that alert, I was starting to get emails back and texts back from people saying, we called, his voicemail box is full. The next day, he committed to voting no. And so that just shows you that in order to get what we want, it's not enough just to vote. It's not enough just to get in groups and talk about it. We have to put this into action. And I am happy to be a conduit for the grassroots to engage with their elected officials and help hold them accountable by informing them and then giving them the opportunity to let the elected officials know what the people think. The other thing that I would say is go to our social media, help spread the word with what we post. And then finally, my organization is funded 100% by donors. And I have people all over the state of Texas and indeed all over the United States who give to the cause. So if you can give a monthly donation of any size, even $1 a month, it helps us put on events like these, pay for my travel budget. It helps me to keep our website going. It helps me to grow our email list. It helps me to reinvest into development and to engaging other donors who are interested in this fight. And it helps me bring the fight into the halls of the Dome in Austin or into the Capitol in DC. And so if you would please visit my website, strongborders.org, pick up some literature and sign up for our email list. With that, I don't know if we have time for questions, but if we have a couple of questions, I'll open the floor up.
I had one thing I just wanted to say real quick.
Okay. Pat.
Hey guys, I work with Chris. I've introduced myself to a bunch of you guys. I just wanted to say, this guy's a family man on top of that. He gave up his career at NASA to come do this because he cares about your families. I mean, it kind of gets me emotional thinking about it because I like to yell into my phone, you know, at people that probably don't want to hear it every day about what's going on in the country. I'm sure this is kind of what happens to you, whether it's relatives or friends. This guy's doing it to the politicians that we need to be talking to. Maybe not yelling at them, but you
Try
know,
not to yell.
try not to yell.
Only sometimes.
But basically, I mean, like he said, whether it's $1, $5, you guys have Netflix. I mean, I know you've heard this pitch before, but man, some of the stuff we pay for is really trivial. This is really serious. And it's going to take a guy like this that's courageous enough to jump into this fight. And like I said, he's supporting a family. It's just him and me cheerleading him on, but it's just him. And so we would love any support. He would love any support. Got to keep this thing going. I just wanted to say that because I respect this man. So anyway,
Thank you. Isaac, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, guys.
That was excellent. Thank you, Chris.